Hello, Professor Wu.
Yes.
While we're waiting questions from members of the audience, I have one at my hand. You have presented us a very informative and educational presentation on the macrocosm, from macrocosmic perspective about the Chinese Buddhist canon, especially the rich meaning through various of a definition of the term, and generally the dynamic and the complexity of the Chinese canon. So it's very educational. Like I say, you presented from a macrocosmic perspective. My question is from micro perspective. My question is related to the formation of the canon, to be precise, the making of the printed canon. So how close actually did the maker of the printed canon really followed the catalog of Buddhist texts in China? I mean, I ask this because I observed that there are some cases in the canon, you have the title of Buddhist texts written differently in manuscript survived today, but you also have the title in the printed canons. There are discrepancies, not very much. One of the discrepancies is what I covered yesterday in my talk on the use of the term "foreshore." There are some texts of which the title contains the phrase, but there are texts which are not having this term in printed canon. So that's why I ask how actually the canon maker actually followed the catalog. Do they have a kind of their own principle, generally based on what they have at hand in terms of having manuscript, as well as basing on, I mean, in terms of their organization, basing on the catalog of the Buddhist texts?
Okay. Thank you very much. Unfortunately, I didn't attend the on-site session yesterday, right? So when you made the presentations, yes, sorry about that. And the question you asked is a very, very important one. So basically what it is, I think, is a relationship between catalog and the canon, right? And my talk, this talk, because it's a keynote talk, so I think probably I will approach it from a general perspective. So it's not a very specialized talk on any particular canon, for example. Although we talk about the Buddhist canon, for example, it's very generic, but however, when we talk about each individual edition, each canon is an individual case. And here you raised a very important questions, which is the relationship between the catalog and the canon. And we know in the history of Chinese Buddhist canon, there exist many, many different kind of a catalog. If you look at the existing catalog, that's we talk about Daoan, for example, in the 3rd century, 4th century. And before him, there are already catalogs according to his documentation. But however, the question about printing canon here, if I'm correct, you may refer to the Kaibao canon, right? So which was finished around 983. And that one, we know for sure it follows Zhisheng's Kaiyuan Shijiaolu, right? It follows that. But if you look at very closely at each title, you want to find the correspondence in the Kaiyuan catalog. There are variations, there are different kinds of variations. And as I mentioned in my talk, you must think about the Buddhist canon as a particular existence, which means physical existence, because the canon has to be printed, right? So the first printed canon. Then the question is where it comes the master copy. You can imagine the process is that if the creators, the producers have the catalog, they want to find a master copy to reproduce that. And the Kaibao canon was created in Chengdu in Sichuan, right? So if we know this early Song dynasty, right? It's early Northern Song dynasty in the Taizu's time. And the Sichuan was just conquered by the Taizu. The reason that this canon wasn't printed in Hangzhou, for example, Hangzhou at that time, not yet part of the Song Empire. And the question is where those producers will find their master copy from which they can create this printed edition. Obviously, it got to be a manuscript edition. But for manuscript edition, we have to bear in mind that the edition, the physical format is not stable, which means each scribe, right? Each scribe, the person who handwritten the canon will have mistakes, for example, right? So this is not accurate. So there got to be some changes. So each manuscript edition is going to be different. So this got preserved in the Kaibao canon, right? Simultaneously, just a little bit behind Kaibao canon, we have a second printed canon, which is the Qidan or the Qidanzang, right? Printed in Beijing. So these are two different systems based on two different kinds of master copies, manuscript editions. So that one, if you compare, the actual printed version look very different. And that is further confirmed by the Korean Goryeo canon, because that one was even better collated. A Korean monk called Sugi actually compared both the Kaibao canon, the Kidan canon, and the first print of the Goryeo canon, right? So the result is a very fascinating, very revealing, right? And for the relationship between the canon and the catalog, I want to comment just very briefly. Right now, I start to question, right? What is Buddhist canon? Right? Just to put it very simply, in my talk, I also mentioned J.Z. Smith, for example. The catalog is very important because it is a list, right? And try to imagine a canon without catalog, right? Can you imagine a canon without catalog, right? So right now, it becomes a very, very interesting. Without catalog, canon, what we call a canon, just a collection of random books. Nobody will know the structure of the canon because the books just come together. This happens when the Japanese imported the Jiang canon from Zhejiang area. So in the 17th century, the Japanese merchants, they brought the canon from Jiang, they shipped it to Nagasaki, and in Nagasaki, the Bakufu officials registered all the books in their catalog. It's just completely a mess. So there's no structure, no sequence. So you don't know what it is, just a bunch of the Buddhist books, right? So this raises a very interesting question. Without the catalog, without that list, there's no Buddhist canon. So this is probably too radical here, right? So we can talk in more detail about each different canon, their formation process. You're going to see something very, very interesting about the relationship between catalog and the actual canon, the physical canon, right, in existence. There's no identical canon, right, to put in this way. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, certainly I agree with you in a sense that there must be a kind of a catalog serving for the structure, general structure of the canon. You need to have some kind of organization of the texts which are scattered around. So my point is that perhaps in the process of making the canon, well, they have the organized structure already, but while they were copying the title of each manuscript or each text, they would follow the hand-copied manuscript instead following the title shown in the catalog. I'm not sure if that's a valid point. And your answer, you mentioned that Korean edition was under making the observed the huge variations between the editions. Now, I'd like to ask a related question. There is a kind of a view saying that the edition of Kaibao Canon were based on poor hand copy manuscripts. Now, my question is, if the project was supported by central government and funded by central government, the central official go there to supervise the project. Why didn't they get the better quality manuscripts, for instance, preserved in the palace library or somewhere, palace monastery, etc.? Why didn't they get that?
Okay, let me answer in this way. Number one, you use the term poor, right, to describe.
That's some scholars express this kind of view.
Okay,
so I'm not certain.
Right. For this Kaibao Canon, you have to bear in mind that before the creation of this printing canon, the Taizu, right, Song Taizu, Zhao Guangyin, first ordered Sichuan to produce a canon, manuscript canon, handwritten canon in silver and gold, right? So it's not poor, right? The government has money, so it's gold and ink, right? So the ink is kind of made with gold and silver. So they created actually manuscript copy. So that costs lots of money. And the poor quality you refer to probably is the textual or bibliographical, right? So the master copy. What we're talking about. But you have to remember just what happened in the Song dynasty, the reason why the Song court want to reproduce Buddhist canon, because right before Zhao Guangyin, that's the later Zhou dynasty, Houzhou. So the Buddhist persecution just happened, right, in the north, not in the south. So you can imagine the Buddhist scriptures being destroyed. So they're lacking of Buddhist scriptures in the northern area. So that's why it was kind of this task has been given to Sichuan, right? Because Sichuan is kind of the origin of the printing. Their printing technique is well developed. So that's the reason why this has been given to Sichuan. And you talk about this bibliographical problem because the Korean monk I mentioned called Sugi, the Chinese will pronounce as Shouqi, right? This is Shouqi, 2 characters. Sugi, he noticed this. That shows the master copy, the Sichuan carvers they use somehow is inferior if you compare with the Khitan version. But however, the Kaibao Canon also innovated, right, so in a great way for creating a printed canon because they maybe it's not innovation, they changed the format. The standard, if you look at the Dunhuang manuscript, the standard kind of a number of one column going to be 17 characters. But if you look at the Kaibao Canon, it's much larger and bigger because one column is only 14 characters, right? So this is new. This is new in the manuscript tradition, and only Kaibao Canon somehow use this format. So you can come to the conclusion that this must be a local or regional tradition. So I usually don't judge the quality of canons because each one is individualized and has close connection with the community. So I emphasize community as well. So you have to look at the Buddhist canon traditions within that local regional community. Right? So I recently published a paper on the creation of a Kaibao canon in Chengdu, for example. So it's very, very likely it was produced in a Buddhist temple, right? So there are different organizations, there are possible government participation, but however, you mentioned government maybe commission this task, but however, this is a Buddhist enterprise, so very likely the government going to assign this or outsource this to a existing printing network controlled by Buddhist monks. So they get job done, the emperor's happy. So eventually they shipped all the Buddhist printing blocks, right, to Kaifeng. And that's the process. as a first printed canon, I think it's good enough, right?
Yes.
This is the first one.
Yes,
The
yes.
second one, the Korean canon, by the way, has been considered as really better correlated because of the advantage of seeing both Kaibao canon, which is coming from central China, and also Kidan, Qidanzang from the north, right? So it's a great advantage for Koreans to be able to do that, right? Very likely they have access to the southern scriptural tradition. I mean, the Zhejiang or Hangzhou area. So I mentioned in my talk in Hangzhou, there's a temple called Korean Temple. That's because the Korean prince, Wuchang, right, in the Northern Song dynasty, visited China and brought back lots of Buddhist scriptures, right? So Wuchang lived between the first printing of the canon, Korean canon, and the second printing of canon. So he is right in the middle. So pretty sure the Koreans somehow got a great advantage, right? Although situated at the peripheral of the Chinese Empire, but be able to see all these different canons. So they created a better one. So that result got assimilated in the Taisho canon. So the reason that what Taisho canon is much, much more superb is exactly because it inherited the Korean tradition. However, the Korean tradition never had substantial influence in China. The Chinese were not aware of the Korean canonical traditions for a long time.